around 11 p.m. on March 30th of 1885, a lone constable, Constable Anderson, was riding through the hostile territory of what is now about central Alberta, and he was riding to the community of Frog Lake. Upon his arrival, he alerted the Northwest Mounted Police Detachment there of the defeat of the Northwest Mounted Police Column and the local militia volunteers in the Battle of Duck Lake. There, the force was ambushed and routed by the rebel forces, and this community hadn't heard about it until now. And so the community, now hearing about this tragedy, they had a couple options now. And so the commander of Fort Pitt, he suggested that they gather themselves up and head to Fort Pitt for safety and just abandon their community of Frog Lake and leave everything behind and just get out of there and get to the safety of the fort. The community wasn't super keen on. Most of the civilians in the town thought it'd be better if they just stayed where they lived, and thought that if they didn't show any fear, that the local tribe would kind of see that as a sign of respect and would leave them alone and not cause any problems for them. Another option they had was that if they wished to stay in the Frog Lake town, that the Northwest Mounted Police would send an additional 15 men to help sort of secure the community and help prevent possible attack. But this again, the community preferred to just stay as they are and don't bring any attention to them and just want to lay low and don't really seem to want to take any advances towards war. And so they declined that offer as well. And they suggested that the police in their area, that they go to the Fort Pitt, and so this leaving the community completely vulnerable for an attack. But they thought that they doing this would show the local natives that they weren't afraid and that they were trusting the tribe nearby. And so the Northwest Mounted Police, the detachment that was there, they prepared to abandon the town and their detachment. And so with the suggestions from the Hudson's Bay Company clerk, they took all the gunpowder and all the ammunition from the Hudson's Bay Company storehouse. They left a couple small little kegs of barrel of gunpowder and stuff, just so that if the natives did come and loot the area, they wouldn't be too suspicious. And so they left a little bit of gunpowder and ammunition, but they took most of it and they headed off to Fort Pitt. Now around this time, Big Bear, the Plains Cree chief of the area, he and his sons were out hunting. They were out on a trip out hunting, trying to get food and supplies for the tribe. And while they were away, their tribe erected a war tent. Basically, a war tent is just a teepee where the local elders of that tribe would gather and meet and just discuss war. They'd talk about should they be involved in war, what would their strategies be, their plans. And when the Cree tribe goes to war, the chief loses all his power and authority over that tribe. And a war chief is either chosen or elected. I'm not quite sure how it works, but a war chief takes leadership over the entire tribe. And so in this case, a man by the name of Wandering Spirit became the war chief of the Cree tribe, while Chief Big Bear was away at this time. And so while Big Bear's away, he kind of loses leadership of his tribe, and Wandering Spirit takes leadership of that tribe. Now about 9 a.m., Wandering Spirit and a few other Cree warriors, they reached the community of Frog Lake. And this is a quote from one of the individuals who was at Frog Lake at the time. It says, "Knowing the Indian character so well and being aware that the more you seemed to confide in them, the more you were liked by them, he and Mr. Quinn concluded to hold a council with the chiefs and inform them of the news from Duck Lake. But to their great astonishment and dismay, the Indians knew more than they did about the affair. And in fact, the Indians knew all about the troubles long before they even reached us." And so basically what this is saying is that a couple of the locals of Frog Lake decided that they'd have a meeting with the natives and discuss the troubles that are happening. But to their surprise, the natives, they already knew about the battle at Duck Lake, and they knew about a lot more than just that. They knew about it for a long time. They knew that this was coming. So Chief Big Bear, one of his sons, Emasis, told Thomas Quinn. Now Thomas Quinn, he was the Indian agent for the area, and so basically what that means is he dealt with food provisions for the local tribes and to issue that out when they needed it and stuff like that. Anyways, Emasis, the son of Chief Big Bear, he said to Thomas Quinn, "We have had bad advice from the half-breeds this winter. They said they would spill much blood in the spring. They wished us to join them. They've already risen. We knew about it before you. They have beaten the soldiers in this fight, killing many." Following the statement, he said that, "We do not wish to join the half-breeds, but we are afraid. We wish to stay here and prove ourselves the friends of the white men. Tell us all the news that comes to you, and we will tell you all we hear. The soldiers will come, perhaps, and want to fight us. We want you to protect us, to speak for us to their chief when they come." So basically he's telling them that, we don't want to attack you guys, but we're worried that the government is going to come and they're going to think we're enemies, and that we want you guys to help kind of advocate for us that we are friends of the government, friends of the white man. And so after hearing this, Thomas Quinn, he assured them that as they remain peaceful, that he will make sure that they will be fed and have enough supplies to survive. And so throughout that day, this sort of discussion about plans, what they should do, that sort of stuff continued, and that the Cree warned the community that Métis rebels will likely be passing through that area and would likely attempt to steal horses in the nighttime, and that they, the Cree, would help prevent this from happening and would help guard the community of Frog Lake from these Métis rebels. And so by the end of the day, both parties shook hands. They felt reassured in their friendship. They felt the community of Frog Lake, they felt safe. They had good relations with the tribe, and so they spent the night just kind of relaxing. Thomas Quinn, he spent the night just talking about his past experiences when he was in the US as a small young boy. His community was massacred by a native tribe, and he was just kind of, telling his friends about this experience he had. And they're kind of relaxing that night, not expecting much to happen. And through the night, Big Bear, he returned from his hunting trip, and he had a meeting with Thomas Quinn. And in that meeting, he told him that Louis Riel, the Métis rebel leader, he had tried to persuade the Cree to join in the rebellion. And Chief Big Bear said this about a dream that he had. "When I was in the Long Knives is basically a nickname for the American cavalry. So when I was in the Long Knives country, I had a dream, an ugly dream. I saw a spring shooting up out of the ground. I covered it with my hand, trying to smother it, but it spurted up between my fingers and ran over the back of my hand. It was a spring of blood." And so, after sharing this dream that he had with Thomas Quinn, he departed out of the community and went up to a tent of his to retire for the night. So throughout the night, the community of Frog Lake, they kind of just stayed up, talking about past experiences, just kind of relaxing, enjoying the evening. And the Cree tribe, they were beating drums, they were dancing, and the community probably thought this was just, celebrating their friendship. But in reality, it was most likely a war dance, and they were preparing for what was going to ensue the next day. Now, Wandering Spirit, the war chief, throughout the night, he sent a party of about 4 warriors to the house of Isidore Mondion, and he was a minor Woods Cree chief, but Wandering Spirit thought he was too friendly with the white men, and so he sent these warriors to his place to basically place him on house arrest. And so these warriors, they came to the house and they told him that he wasn't able to leave. And as this is happening, Isidore Mondian, the minor chief that is being kind of restricted to his home, says this: "Wandering spirit must think his followers are very brave. 2. That he sends forward to guard a single man." After he said this, a fight broke out with rifle and knives, and Isidore was beaten and drugged and tied up for the remainder of the night. And so, not a good start to the day. He was tied up until morning, when I believe he was untied, and he was still remained on house arrest, basically. At about 4 a.m. on April 2nd of 1885, around 2 Cree warriors snuck into the window of Thomas Quinn's house, and they crept up the stairs, and they aimed a gun at Thomas Quinn, and his wife, who was also Cree. She heard the commotion, and she woke up and she put herself between Thomas Quinn and the Cree warriors who were about to shoot him. Now 2 men outside who were Cree, who were her brother and father, they heard the commotion and they rushed in, and they basically kicked the guys out of the house, got them out of there. But more warriors came in, Wandering Spirit came in as well, and Thomas Quinn was basically ordered to leave the house, and his family protested. They didn't want him to leave the house, but he knew that, if he didn't leave the house, things could get messy pretty quick, and so he agreed to leave the house with the warriors, and so he did that. Now, as Thomas Quinn is being taken prisoner pretty much and escorted out of his house, he said, "Never will they be able to say Kapawat Tamat," which is Quinn's Cree name, which means Sioux speaker, was afraid to face them. So he says this as he's being escorted out of his home. So between 4:30 and 5 in the morning, residents were awakened that horses had been stolen by the Métis. Though more likely, this was just the Cree trying to cover up the fact that they were stealing the horses themselves. And so after this, the Hudson's Bay Company store was raided by about 20 warriors. They demanded to be given ammunition and powder to defend from Métis attackers, and so they were given the supplies, and then they escorted all the men of the community to the Indian agent's office in the community. At about 6 a.m., Mr. Cameron, the Hudson's Bay Company store owner, he was awakened by about 20 warriors, and they demanded that he open up the Hudson's Bay Company store and give them all the ammunition, any weapons, or else they were just going to break in themselves. So he walked over, he unlocked the building, and they basically ransacked the place and took anything that could be used as a weapon, any ammunition that they could find, all that sort of stuff. And Big Bear entered the trading post and basically told his tribe to just get out, behave yourselves, and stop, looting this guy's store. After this, Mr. Cameron, he was escorted away to the Indian agent office along with the other 9 other white men of the community, and they were all gathered into this Indian agent office. So Wandering Spirit, the war chief, he demanded that he wanted beef, and so Thomas Quinn, the Indian agent, he ordered that a ox be slaughtered, and so that the natives could have a feast of beef. And after this, the white men were freed and were allowed to go do about as they wished that day. One man was having breakfast in his house, and when about 30 warriors, all in war paint, bursted into the house and just kind of helped themselves to his meal and just kind of intruded into his home, made themselves comfortable, ate his food. And Big Bear was there as well, although he remained unpainted. He wasn't wearing war paint. He just kind of was observing the situation. And so since Good Friday was the following day, a church service was being held. And so the community gathered in the church to celebrate Jesus Christ, and they were gathering in this church. And as they did this, they heard gunfire, and Wandering Spirit burst into the church with a rifle and was firing away outside, and he came inside the church. Now, Mr. Cameron, the Hudson's Bay Company worker, he describes the situation. This quote here. There came the rattle of musketry from the door, and looking out from beneath my arm, I saw a wandering spirit enter. He moved cat-like on his moccasined feet to the center of the church and dropped on his right knee there, his Winchester clutched in his right hand, the butt resting on the floor. His lynx-skin war bonnet, from which depended 5 large eagle plumes, crowned his head. His eyes burned, and his hideously painted face was set in lines of deadly menace. Never shall I forget the feelings his whole presence, his whole appearance and actions excited in me as I watched it stupefied amazement while he half knelt, glaring up at the altar and the white-robed priests in sacrilegious mockery. He was a demon, a wild animal, savage, ruthless, thirsting for blood. I doubted then that we should, any of us again, see the outside of this chapel. So it's a pretty scary sight. These people there in this church about to worship Jesus Christ. And this man bursts in with the rifle, firing it outside. He walks in. He kneels down at the altar wearing his war paint. And after this, the other warriors came in as well. And they're just being very disruptive, very mocking, very loud. Any local who wasn't at church at this point was rushed in by the other warriors. And the warriors refused to remove headdress, which at the time, if you're a man, when you entered into a building, you would take off your headdress as a sign of respect, so they refused to do that. They were beating drums, they were drinking alcohol, they were whooping, and so they were just being very disruptive. And so Father Fafard called for peace and forbade that there should be any harm, and he just dismissed the congregation at that period because things were not looking good. It was chaotic, it was messy, it was ugly, and he just was like, okay, we're not having this Sunday, or not Sunday, but we're not having this church meeting any longer. Everyone go home. And so at 8:30, the Catholic priests were forced into one of the houses. More beef demanded, which Thomas Quinn met by slaughtering 2 more oxen, and the Hudson's Bay Company post was ransacked some more, and the Northwest Mounted Police Detachment was also looted. So between 9:30 and 10 a.m., the white settlers and the other settlers in the area, so Métis civilians, they were ordered to relocate to the Cree camp, which was located about a mile away, and they were told that was so that they could protect them easier from the Métis. And so, after traveling about 70 yards, Thomas Quinn got tired of just being pushed around place to place and shoved along the route, and he stopped in his tracks, and he just refused to be a prisoner any longer. And Wandering Spirit said this to him: "You have a hard head. When you say no, you mean no, and stick to it. Now, if you love your life, you will do as I say. Go to our camp." And so Thomas Quinn, holding to his word, he refused once more. And he was met by this response from Wandering Spirit: "I don't know what kind of a head you have that you do not seem to understand. I may as well kill you." And so after saying this, Wandering Spirit aimed his rifle at Thomas Quinn's head and shot him dead through the head. Immediately after this, Wandering Spirit ordered another warrior to shoot the Indian Agency's carpenter. So this man, this warrior, he didn't really want to do it, but he felt pressured he had to. So he aimed his rifle and he shot the man in a spot in the shoulder, making sure it wouldn't kill him. The man fell down and he went over to make sure he was alive. And this is the warrior was named Bad Arrow, who shot the man, and this is what he said: "I raised my gun and fired where I would not kill him. I shot him in the shoulder and he fell and lay on the ground. I asked him if I had killed him, and he shook his head. I made a sign to close his eyes and sham dead. The carpenter who just had been shot is probably filled with fear and adrenaline and confusion. And shortly after being shot, he attempted to try and stand up again and try to get to safety and get out of there. And as he did so, a different warrior saw this and he shot him dead. And after this, the warriors all began doing their war whoops, and things just got messy real fast, and the killing spree had begun. So after this, an elderly man began running away, trying to get to safety. A bullet struck the hat off his head. He turned around, begged for his life, begged for mercy, and the warriors kept chasing him on horseback, and they kept firing. And so he turned around, told them, "Please have mercy." They kept firing at him, so he tried to run away, but he was quickly gunned down and killed. So Big Bear, at this time, he was away. He was in his teepee. He heard all the gunfire and the screams of the dying and the war whoops from the warriors. He rushed to the scene of the massacre, and he was shouting 2 times. He shouted to stop. And although Big Bear, in the past, he had caused problems for the government and little difficulties in the past, he didn't want innocent people to be slaughtered like this. He did not want this to happen, and at this point he didn't have the power over his tribe to really have a say in this, and so he basically didn't really have a say at this point into what his tribe was doing. And one of the women began crying, and her husband began trying to comfort her, and he was saying, "My dear wife, be brave to the end." And as he said these words, he was shot in the back and dropped to the ground, his wife being dragged away from her dead husband by the warriors. Another woman, Mrs. Delaney, seeing the horror around her, she heard her husband say, "I am shot too," and he staggered about 20 feet before dropping to the ground. Mrs. Delaney, seeing him just get shot and fall down to the ground, she rushed to him and propped his head onto her lap, and she called for a priest, and Father Fafard rushed to the dying man. After finishing a prayer with the man, the father said, "My poor brother, I think you are safe with God." As Father Fafard said these words, he was shot in the back and dropped over top of the body of the other man. And Mrs. Delaney, she was dragged away from her husband, just like the previous woman was as well. And so Mrs. Delaney, seeing her husband get shot, she rushed to him. She propped his head onto her lap, and she called for a priest to come over. And so Father Fafard, he ran over and he said a prayer with the man, and after saying that prayer, he said, "My poor brother, I think you are safe with God." And after saying this, the priest was shot in the back as well, falling on top of the other man who was shot. And the other man, Mr. Delaney, he was shot once more, which the shot killed him. And this man, he spent lots of his time actually helping the local Cree tribe, and he supplied them with food and supplies in harsh winters, and he spent lots of time helping them. And yeah, he met his end this way. Mrs. Delaney, she was dragged away from her dead husband, just like the previous woman was as well. And another priest attempted to take action, but he was shot and wounded by a wandering spirit himself. So 2 men, a Mr. George Dill and Mr. William Gilchrist, and a little white dog, they attempted to flee the slaughter and tried to run away from this situation, but they were both chased down a few hundred yards and shot and killed as well. Now, Father Fafard, who was just shot previously, he was discovered by another warrior that he wasn't dead yet. He was still just laying there looking lifeless pretty much. He was probably paralyzed if he was shot in the back. He's just laying there. And a warrior named Walking the Sky, a Cree boy who Father Fafard actually raised. He raised this kid basically as his own. and this Cree warrior walked over and he shot the priest dead. So, after the initial killings, the Cree began looting the town. They started just getting drunk. They were wearing the priest's clothing, the ceremonial robes. One warrior found Father Marcad. He was still alive. He was shot and wounded at this point, and so the warrior sat with him. He apologized for what had happened, and he sat with the priest until he passed away. Now, the Hudson's Bay Company worker, Mr. Cameron, he was the only survivor, and he was hidden in a tent under Big Bear's protection. And so this was the only white man to survive from the community of Frog Lake. All the others had been killed. And so these, the two white women and about, I believe, a few dozen Métis civilians as well, they were taken hostage and were taken with the Cree for about 2 months after this massacre. So eventually, men of the Battleford Relief Column would come across the scene of the massacre, and on the 24th of May, which was Queen Victoria's birthday. So the men had the responsibility of dealing with the dead bodies, and they made makeshift masks, which they soaked in alcohol to try and protect themselves from the smell of the decomposing dead bodies. And many of the bodies were unrecognizable. Some of them were missing limbs, heads. They were burnt and charred, so it was hard to tell really what they looked like. And after seeing the site of the massacre, it gave the soldiers a sense of duty, wishing to avenge the innocent life that was lost there that day, and it gave them that extra encouraging spirit to fight harder. One of the regiments that was there, the 65th, they up to this point they were kind of unsure if they'd be willing to fight in the rebellion because it was a French regiment. But upon seeing the massacre, their thoughts on the rebels changed. And the two women that survived the massacre, the two white women that survived, Mrs. Teresa Gomlock and Mrs. Teresa Delaney, they survived, and they later went on to write a book about their experiences called 2 Months in the Camp of Big Bear. And William Cameron, the Hudson's Bay Company worker, he who was the only white man to survive the massacre, he later went on to write about his experiences in a book called Blood Red the Sun. So many years ago, I made a video about the Frog Lake Massacre in a very low quality video, basically just a slideshow. And I got comments that are calling it racially biased because I didn't victimize the Cree. And the reason I didn't victimize the Cree is because they weren't the victims. The victims were the people that were brutally massacred and killed. And they were killed because of Wandering Spirit and his warriors who were filled with lust and a thirst for blood. Okay, there are good people of every race. Okay, so this don't call me a racist like you have in the past when I'm talking about historical facts. Okay, the Wandering Spirit was a terrible individual, and his followers were messed up, bloodthirsty killers. Big Bear, at this point, he didn't really have much power over his tribe, and so he didn't really have much say, but Wandering Spirit and a few other of his warriors, I think about 7 others, they were hung for their actions here this day, which they completely deserved. They deserved to get the noose because that's what you should do to murdering a scum. And so, yeah, if you don't like this, if you don't like the fact that there are bad people of every race, there are good people of every race, then maybe history isn't for you. But history is filled with great things and terrible things. Okay? If you don't like that, maybe history isn't for you. But it's our job to understand history and historical facts and stop trying to change things and twist things around to fit political agendas. History is history, and you can't change that. And so thank you for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, then please feel free to like the video and to subscribe. And thank you for watching and have a fantastic day.
Shall we no more go forward, but tamely travel back? Shall we look on while the traitors, they destroy our Union Jack? He never shall surrender the glories of our past, but shoulder still to shoulder, protect them to the last. We must and shall go forward, we'll never travel back, and forever, aye forever, we shall hoist our Union Jack.